She wrote his murders before the world ever heard of them. Every location, every body, every secret that only a dead man should have known. Critics called her books cheap entertainment, airport paperbacks, grocery list murders, nothing to fear. The most dangerous man in Chicago called them something else. He called them a confession, and the night he walked through the snow into her candlelit book signing to silence her for good, he discovered a truth far more terrifying than a spy in his ranks. He discovered that the one mercy of his entire life, the little girl he was once ordered to kill, the girl he let run into the snow 20 years ago, had grown up, and she was writing everything down. This is ink and ash. Before we begin, if you love dark, obsessive, slow-burn Mafia romance, turn the lights down, put your headphones in, and stay with me all the way to the end. Because the final twist rewrites everything you think you know about who is really hunting whom. The candles are already lit. The snow is already falling. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Reader in the Snow. The candles should have been the first warning. 40 of them lined down the long oak table of the Drexel Library's private hall, each flame leaning the same direction as if something cold were breathing through the room. Snow came down outside the tall windows in slow, deliberate sheets, turning Chicago into a held breath. Inside, 200 readers waited in a hush that felt almost religious, clutching copies of a book with a black cover and a single red thread stitched down its spine. The Ledger Man, by Cora Hale. Cora sat at the head of the table beneath a chandelier that had been dimmed to amber, a fountain pen in her hand, and a smile arranged on her face like furniture. She had learned the smile the way she learned everything, by watching, by reproducing, by giving people the version of herself they expected, so they would not look for the version underneath. The critics called her work cheap entertainment, airport fiction with delusions of literature. One of them had written last spring that Cora Hale writes murder the way other people write grocery lists, efficiently, joylessly, and with an unsettling familiarity. He hadn't known how close he'd come. "Could you make it out to Danielle?" a woman whispered, sliding her copy across, with 2 L's. "You're the reason I don't sleep anymore. I mean that as a compliment. That's the only way I take it," Cora said and signed. Her handwriting was small and certain. "For Danielle, keep the lights off. C.H." She did not look up much. Looking up meant being seen, and being seen had always felt to her like standing in a doorway with the wind behind you. So she watched the line in fragments, a scarf, a chewed thumbnail, a wedding ring turned backward, and she signed and she smiled, and somewhere around the 90th book, she felt the room change temperature. It was not the candles. It was the door. 3 men had come in from the snow without taking off their coats. They did not get in line. They arranged themselves along the back wall the way punctuation arranges a sentence, one at each corner, one at the center, and the noise of the room thinned around them as if sound itself had learned to be careful. The library's event coordinator, a nervous man named Philip, who had spent the evening refilling water glasses, went toward them, and then halfway across the floor, simply stopped, turned, and walked back to the wine table as though he'd forgotten why he'd ever moved. Then the 4th man came in. Cora felt him before she saw him the way you feel. A storm change its mind. He was not large in the way the others were large. He was something worse, contained. He wore a charcoal overcoat dusted with melting snow, and he moved through the crowded room without touching anyone and without anyone touching him, a corridor opening in front of him by instinct. His face was all clean angles, and winter dark hair pushed back a jaw that hadn't smiled in a long time. He was beautiful the way a drawn blade is beautiful. You admired it, and you stepped back at the same moment. He did not get in line either. He walked the length of the oak table past the candles, past the readers who suddenly found their shoes very interesting, and he stopped directly across from her, and he set a book down on the wood between them. Her book, the black cover, the red thread. "Make it out," he said to the man who's been losing sleep for entirely different reasons. His voice was low and unhurried, the voice of someone who had never in his life needed to raise it. Up close, his eyes were a gray, so dark they were almost the color of the snow at the window, and they were not looking at her face. They were reading it, cataloging it, comparing it, she would realize much later, to a memory. "And who should I say it's for?" Cora asked. Her hand had not moved toward the book. She had learned a long time ago to notice when a room had teeth. "A reader," he said. "A very careful one. I've read all 4. I read The Ledger Man twice. Most people only admit to that under oath." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not a smile, the place a smile would go if he ever built one. "I'd like to ask you about chapter 19, he said. The part where your accountant launders money through a shipping concern on the South Docks. Carrick and Vane. You described the office. The green lamp. The second ledger he kept inside the false bottom of the bottom drawer. The one he didn't tell his employers about. He paused, and the pause had weight. You described the way the light came through the warehouse windows at 4 in the afternoon. Slatted. Gold. Falling across the floor like the bars of a cage. It's fiction, Cora said. It's exact, he said. And there it was, the thing she had spent her whole career pretending not to know. The reason she wrote in a rented studio with the blinds drawn. The reason she'd never let a journalist into her home. The reason that 4 books deep, she still flinched every time a stranger told her how real it felt. Because Carrick and Vane was real. The green lamp was real. She had never been to the South Docks in her life. She had built that office out of a fog of news clippings and court filings and one photograph in a 15-year-old Tribune article. About a fire built it the way her mind built everything. By pulling threads no one else could see, and weaving them into a thing that was impossibly correct, down to the grain of the wood. She had always assumed it was a gift. A trick of pattern of obsessive reading of a brain that couldn't stop assembling. She had never once let herself wonder where the gift came from. You should go, she said quietly. I will, the man said. Soon, he leaned down just slightly, just enough that the candle between them threw his shadow long across the table. And when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to the register people use for confessions and threats, which she would learn were in his world, the same register. I came here tonight, he said, to find out who's feeding you. Because either you have a person inside a place that has no inside a place I built, or you're something I've never met before. And I needed to look at your face to know which. And Cora said. Her heart was a fist against her ribs. She did not let it reach her voice. That at least she had practiced. He studied her for a long, terrible moment. The snow fell, the candles leaned, and whatever he had come into that room expecting to find, she watched him not find it. She watched something close behind his eyes and something else older, more careful, open. You don't know, he said almost to himself. You wrote it all, and you don't even know what you wrote. Know what he straightened. He picked up the book she hadn't signed, and before he turned to go, he said one thing more, so softly that only she could hear it over the candle hush of the room. You have a very dangerous mind, Miss Hale. The most dangerous I've ever met. And I'm going to have to decide what to do about it before someone less patient than me reads chapter 19. Then he was gone, the corridor of bodies closing behind him, the 3 men peeling off the wall like shadows, the door letting in one cold breath of snow and shutting it out again. Philip, the coordinator, blinked as though waking. The line shuffled forward. A girl with 2 L's in her name asked if Cora was all right. She looked a little pale. Was it the heat from all these candles? Yes, Cora said. The candles. She signed 40 more books with a hand that did not shake because she had spent her whole life teaching it not to. And underneath the table, where no one could see her, other hand was pressed flat against her own knee, holding herself in place, while a single sentence circled in the dark of her mind like a fish under ice. You wrote it all. And you don't even know what you wrote. Chapter 2. The photograph in the drawer. His name was Adrian Castellan, and he did not believe in coincidence, which was inconvenient because he had just driven away from one. The SUV moved through the snow toward the lake wipers, ticking the city, smearing gold and red across the wet glass. In the front seat, his driver Matteo, 30 years old and the only man alive Adrian trusted to be in a car with him when he was thinking, said nothing because Matteo had learned to read the particular silence Adrian fell into when a thing had gotten under his skin. In Adrian's lap sat the book. Black cover, red thread. He had not opened it. He didn't need to. He had it nearly memorized. That was the problem. For 3 weeks since one of his lieutenants had laughed and tossed a paperback onto the table of the back room at the Aria. You gotta read this, boss. This lady's writing about us. It's hilarious. She even gets the docs wrong, Adrian. Had read 4 novels by a woman named Cora Hale and found, line by line, that she got nothing wrong. She got the docs right. She got the green lamp right. She got the second ledger right. And the second ledger had been a thing exactly 2 men had ever known about, and one of them had been dead for 20 years, and the other was Adrian's uncle. He had come to the signing tonight to look into the eyes of an informant. He had built a list, a short list, because the things she described had short lists. He had been prepared to find calculation in her face, the brittle confidence of someone selling secrets or the flat affect of someone who'd been turned by a federal agency. He had walked the length of that table ready to mark her for handling, and handling in Adrian's world had only ever meant one thing. Instead, he had found a woman with ink-stained fingers and a smile she clearly hated wearing, who flinched at the word exact, like a person who had spent her whole life flinching at being correct. He had found someone who did not know, and under the not knowing like a watermark you only see when you hold the page to the light, he had found something that made the back of his neck go cold. He had found a face he had seen before. He told himself it wasn't possible. 20 years was a long time. A child's face dissolved into an adult's. And yet, the set of the eyes, the particular stubbornness of the jaw when she'd said it's fiction, the way she held her fear so far down inside herself that you'd only know it was there if you'd once watched a 7-year-old do the exact same thing under a staircase in a house that was filling up with smoke. Boss, Mateo said carefully, because they'd been parked outside the lake house for a full minute without Adrian moving. You want me to look into her records family, the usual? Adrian looked down at the book, at the red thread. No, he said. And then because the lie was already loose in him and he hated lies, he hadn't decided to tell yes. Quietly. Only you. Birth records, schools, anyone who raised her. And Mateo. He met the younger man's eyes in the rear view. If you find anything before 1996, a fire, a name, change a death certificate for a child, you bring it to me and to no one. Especially not to my uncle. Mateo's face did the thing professional faces do when they decide not to ask. Understood. Adrian got out into the snow. He stood for a moment on the steps of the house. His family's blood money had built the lake, black and enormous behind it. And he opened the book to chapter 19, and he read by the light coming through the door, and on the 3rd page, he found the sentence that had kept him up for 3 weeks. The accountant kept a photograph in the false drawer beside the 2nd ledger. A girl, 6 or 7 gap-toothed, holding a paper crown. He looked at it when he was afraid. He was afraid most nights now. There had been no photograph in any clipping, no photograph in any file, no photograph anywhere but in the drawer of a dead man's desk in a house that had burned to the ground in 1996, a drawer Adrian had opened himself on his uncle's orders the same night he'd opened a small closet under the stairs and found instead of evidence a child. He closed the book. The snow fell on his shoulders and he let it. She doesn't know, he thought. She wrote our gravest secret, and she doesn't even know she's the photograph. And then, with the particular dread of a man who has spent his life keeping things buried and feels the ground beginning to soften. If I figured it out from 4 books, he'll figure it out from 1 more. And he won't come to a signing. He'll come to her bedroom while she sleeps. Chapter 3. The Careful Editor. He came to her studio instead. Cora wrote in a converted dance hall above a shuttered theater on the near west side, a long room with tall arched windows she kept blinded and a single lamp she kept low. She'd chosen it for its 2 staircases. She always chose places with 2 ways out. The way some people always sit facing the door, a habit she'd never examined, because examining it felt like pulling a thread on a sweater she was still wearing. She was there at 1 in the morning, 6 days after the signing, because she could not sleep. And she could not sleep because every time she closed her eyes she smelled smoke. She was writing the next book, Book 5. She'd told her editor it would be called The Witness. She hadn't known why until she wrote the title, and then she'd sat very still for a long time. She heard the lock turn downstairs. Not brake turn. Someone with a key. Or someone who didn't need one. Cora did not scream. She'd never been a screamer. The instinct had been trained out of her young, though she didn't remember the training. She moved to the 2nd staircase, silent on bare feet, and she had one hand on the cold iron rail when his voice came up out of the dark, unhurried as ever. If I were here to hurt you, Adrian Castellan said, I wouldn't have used the front door. She stopped. She turned. He was standing at the top of the 1st staircase, snow melting in his hair, that charcoal coat dark, with it holding nothing in his hands, and somehow more frightening for it. He had taken off his gloves. She noticed that. She noticed everything. It was the whole of her curse. That's not as comforting as you think, she said. No, he agreed. Comforting isn't something I'm good at. He came no closer. He'd positioned himself, she realized, between her and neither exit, a man making a point of not cornering her. Sit down, Miss Hale. Please. I've come to do something I've never done in my life, and I'd rather not do it standing in your stairwell. What's that? Tell the truth, he said. Most of it. She did not sit down. But she came back into the lamplight and she folded her arms and she let him see that she was afraid and unbowed at the same time, which was the only honest thing she knew how to be. He told her then, a version of the truth carved to a careful shape, that he was a man whose business was discreet. that her novels described that business with an accuracy that was for him a catastrophe, not because she was lying, but because she was right. And being right would eventually get her killed by people far less interested than he was in why. That he had come to the signing to find a traitor, and had found instead a woman who could reconstruct a locked room from the shadow it cast in a newspaper. "You're not a spy," he said. "I know that now. You're worse for my purposes. You're a mirror. And there are men in my world who, when they see their reflection, would rather break the glass than look." "Then why are you here instead of breaking it?" Cora asked. The question landed somewhere behind his eyes. He was quiet for a moment, the lamp throwing half his face into gold and leaving the rest to the dark. "Because I've decided to do something stupid," he said. "I'm going to keep you alive, which means I'm going to keep you accurate, but accurate about the things that won't get you killed and wrong about the things that will. You're going to keep writing your books, Miss Hale, and I'm going to be the reason the dangerous chapters are safely, beautifully false. You're offering to be my consultant. I'm offering to be your editor," Adrian said. "The one who tells you which truths are load-bearing." A pause. "And in exchange, you're going to stop reaching into a fire you don't understand. Because every time you reach in, you pull out a piece of something real, and one of these days you're going to pull out a name, and the man who owns that name is going to come and ask you the question I came to ask, and he won't take. It's fiction for an answer. And what makes you so sure," Cora said slowly, "that you're any different?" He looked at her for a long moment. The snow ticked at the dark windows, and something passed over his face that she would spend weeks trying to name something that looked impossibly like grief. "Nothing," he said. "Except that I've already had the chance to do you harm. Once. A long time ago." He turned toward the stairs. "And I didn't." "What does that mean?" But he was already going down into the dark, his footsteps even unhurried, a man who had said exactly as much as he'd come to say and not one word more. "Lock your second door, Miss Hale," he said from the bottom. "You always leave it open. Someday I won't be the one who comes up it." The front lock turned. The door closed, and Cora stood alone in the lamplight with her arms wrapped around herself, and on the desk behind her the cursor blinked at the end of a sentence in a book she'd titled The Witness before she'd known why, and somewhere far down, underneath her in a closet, she had bricked over so young she didn't know it was. There, a 7-year-old in a paper crown held very still and waited for the smoke to pass. Chapter 4. The Girl Under the Stairs. He became over the following weeks the strangest fixture of her strange life. He did not call. He did not text. He simply appeared at the studio after midnight at the coffee place she thought no one knew she went to once, in the back of a black SUV idling outside her building in a downpour, the door already open as she came out, the rain coming down in silver ropes through the streetlight. She got in because the alternative was standing in the rain, wondering whether the men across the street were his or someone else's. And she'd already learned that when Adrian Castellan was nearby, the someone else's kept their distance. She told herself it was research. She told herself she was using him the way she used everything, extracting, weaving, building. And it was true. He gave her things no clipping ever could. The grammar of his world, the way deals were sealed, with a glass left unfinished, the way a man's loyalty could be read in where he chose to stand in a room. She wrote it all down, and she wrote it all wrong on his instruction, salting her chapters with elegant falsehoods, and her editor said book 5 was the best thing she'd ever done. So alive, so dangerous. Where was she getting it? But it was also a lie, the research story, and she knew it was a lie the night she caught herself listening for the lock to turn. He was not warm. He never became warm. That was the thing about him, that she came against every instinct to trust. He didn't perform kindness. When he was gentle, it cost him something, and she could see the cost, and the seeing was its own kind of intimacy. He read her books like scripture, and argued with her about her own characters as though they were real people he was personally responsible for. He told her once that her accountant, the doomed, frightened, ledger-keeping accountant, who haunted all 4 novels under 4 different names, was the only character he'd ever read who felt like a man he'd actually known. "You write him like you loved him," Adrian said. They were in the studio, 3 in the morning. He was standing at the blinded window with a glass of her bad whiskey, not drinking it. Every book, different name, different city. Same man, same fear, same green lamp. He turned. "Who is he, Cora?" It was the first time he'd used her name without the miss. "He's no one," she said. "He's a composite. I read a lot of court records. You read a lot of court records, he repeated, and out of all of them you build over and over the same gentle, terrified man who keeps a photograph of a little girl in a paper crown. The whiskey glass was very still in his hand. The room was very still, and Cora felt the floor of her certainty go soft, because she had never told anyone about the paper crown. It wasn't in any book. She'd cut it. She'd cut it from chapter 19 at the last second, because it had made her cry at her desk, for reasons she couldn't explain, and she'd told herself the scene was stronger without it, and she had never spoken of it to another living soul. "How do you know about the crown?" she said. The stillness in him changed. She watched him understand his mistake a half-second after he made it, watched the careful man let something slip, and watched him decide in real time not to lie to her, which frightened her more than any lie could have. "Because I read the version with the crown in it," Adrian said quietly. "There is no version with the crown in it. I cut it before anyone saw it." "I know," he said. The two words sat in the room like a third person. Adrian. Her voice had gone very low and very even. The voice she used when a room had teeth. "How do you know about the photograph in the drawer?" He set the glass down. He crossed the room slowly, the way you approach something that might bolt, and he stopped an arm's length away, closer than he'd ever let himself stand, and the lamp lit the exhaustion in his face that she'd never let herself notice before the 20 years of it. "Because I'm the one who opened the drawer," he said. The room tilted. She didn't move. She'd gotten very good over a lifetime at not moving. "The fire," she said. 1996. The article. The accountant who. His name was Thomas Delaney, Adrian said. He kept 2 ledgers. He was going to give the second one to the government. The night before he could, my uncle sent men to his house to make sure he never did. I was 19. I was one of the men. He held her eyes, and he did not let himself look away, and she understood that the not looking away was the most violent thing he had ever done to himself. My orders were to make sure no one in that house survived to repeat what they knew. The accountant, his wife, and his daughter. Cora's ears were ringing. From very far away she heard herself say, "His daughter died in the fire," the article said. "A little girl, 7 years old. They never recovered. There was a closet under the stairs," Adrian said. "I opened it, and there was a little girl inside in a paper crown, holding so still. She'd nearly stopped breathing, looking up at me with her father's eyes, and I had a job to do, and instead His voice broke the first crack she'd ever heard in it, and he pushed through it, the way she pushed through everything. Instead, I took her out the back, through the kitchen, past her mother, who was already past her mother, and I put her over the fence into the snow, and I told her to run and not stop and not ever, ever tell anyone her real name. And she ran, and I went back inside, and I told my uncle the girl had burned with the rest. And I have carried that lie for 20 years because it is the only good thing I have ever done, and it would get me killed." The lamp hummed. The snow fell, and Cora Hale, best-selling novelist, dismissed by critics as cheap entertainment, stood in her studio at 3 in the morning and felt the bricked-over closet inside her crack. Open at last, and out of it came not a memory, but a smell. Smoke and her father's cologne, and the cold of the snow, and a voice, a young man's voice, low and shaking, saying, "Run, and don't stop, and don't ever tell anyone your name." "Say it again," she whispered. "What you told her to do. Say it the way you said it." He understood. She watched him understand, and she watched him be afraid. And then he said it, of the cadence, exact 20 years deep, a sentence his mouth had clearly shaped 10,000 times in the dark. "Run, and don't stop, and don't ever, ever tell anyone your name." And the 7-year-old in the paper crown, who had been waiting under the stairs of Cora's mind for 2 decades, finally stopped holding her breath. "It was you," Cora said. The words came out in pieces. "You're the man from the snow. I dreamed about you my whole life. I thought I'd made you up. A guardian. I put you in every book. The stranger who lets the witness live." She was crying now silently, the way she'd learned to cry without making a sound. "I'm Cora Delaney. I'm the photograph in the drawer. I never knew. I know," Adrian said. "God help me, I know." And he did the second good thing he had ever done in his life. He closed the arm's length between them, and he didn't kiss her, and didn't reach for her, in any of the ways he wanted. Just put one hand against the side of her face, The way you'd cup a candle in the wind, and he let the witness he'd saved cry into the palm of the man who'd saved her, in a room above a dead theater, while the city slept and the snow erased the streets. And 20 years of held breath went out of both of them at once. Chapter 5. The Arithmetic of a Fire. What neither of them said that night, because Adrian wasn't ready, and Cora couldn't yet hold it, was the math. The math was this: Thomas Delaney died in 1996, when Cora was 7. But Cora had published her debut novel at 17. And in that debut, a clumsy, furious, gorgeous thing she'd written in a foster placement on a library computer, the book the critics had called unsettlingly familiar before anyone knew her name, she had written the death of an accountant. The exact death. The green lamp. The second ledger. The fire that was made to look like an accident. A scene she'd believed she'd invented, drawn out of nightmare, and instinct the way she drew everything. She hadn't invented it. She'd remembered it. Her 7-year-old mind had photographed that house, and her 17-year-old hands had developed the film, and someone had read it. Because there was exactly one other person alive who knew how Thomas Delaney really died. Not the cover story of a faulty furnace, but the true sequence. The men, the order of the rooms, the green lamp knocked to the floor. The man who had ordered it. And 10 years after the fire, a debut novel had crossed that man's desk, and he had read his own buried crime described in a teenager's prose, and he had understood the way Adrian understood, that there was only one way the author could know. The witness had not died in the fire. The witness had grown up, and the witness was writing it all down. Cora didn't know any of that yet, but Vincent Castellan had known it for 13 years, and he had spent those 13 years reading every word she published, waiting, patient as a spider, patient as cancer, for her to finally write the one detail that would tell him not just that she was alive, but where. Chapter 6. The Trap Chapter. She decided to bait the trap herself. This is the part Adrian would never have allowed, which is exactly why she didn't tell him. Because somewhere in the weeks after the studio, after the crying, after the hand against her face, after the slow, terrible turning of suspicion into fascination, into something she refused to name, even to herself, Cora Delaney had stopped being only the witness and started being the hunter. She had a father in the ground under a false cause of death. She had a mother she could now horribly remember. And she had the one thing her enemy had never counted on, a brain that could build a locked room from a shadow and a publishing schedule that put her words in front of him 4 times a decade. So she wrote a chapter. She told Adrian it was a throwaway scene, color, nothing. She let him correct the safe parts, and then after he'd gone, she went back in, and she planted 3 details that were not true and could not have come from anywhere but the inside of the organization's most guarded history. She described the accountant's murder again, but this time she changed 3 things. She moved the second ledger from the desk drawer to a floor safe. She gave the ordering man a specific false teller habit of turning his wedding ring when he lied. And she set the killing not in the house, but in a warehouse on the South Docks on a specific false date. 3 lies, 3 lures. And she sent the chapter not to her editor, but through a careful series of cutouts. She'd researched the way she researched everything into the one place she knew it would be read by the wrong man. She sold it anonymously as a leaked excerpt to a true crime forum that she had noticed. Over years of obsessive reading, was monitored by someone who only ever logged in to read about one 15-year-old fire. Then she sat back and waited to see who reacted to a lie only the killer could recognize as a lie. She didn't have to wait long. Chapter 7. The Man Who Turned His Ring. The first reaction was a man at her readings. Not Adrian's men, she knew his men now the way you learn the regulars at a diner. These were new, older. One in particular, grey and unhurried, who came to a signing in Evanston and stood at the back, not reading the book but reading her, and who, when she met his eyes across the room, turned a heavy gold wedding ring once around his finger and smiled at her like a man confirming a suspicion. She had invented the wedding ring tell. She had made it up, and here was a man performing it back to her, telling her without a word, "I read your lie, and I know it's a lie, and only 2 people on earth know it's a lie, and now I know you're the other one." Cora's blood went to ice. But she had spent her whole life teaching her hands not to shake, and so she smiled back and she signed his book for a careful reader. C.H. And she watched him fold it under his arm and walk out into the snow. and she memorized his face the way she memorized everything. And only when his car pulled away did she allow herself to walk very calmly to the bathroom and be sick. That night, Adrian came to the studio, and he knew the second he saw her. He always knew. "What did you do?" he said. "Not a question. I found him," she said. "I baited a chapter, and I found your uncle's reader, the man he uses to watch me. Gray hair, gold ring, about 60. That's not his reader," Adrian said, and all the color was gone from his voice. "Cora. That's not a man he sends. Gray hair, gold ring, 60, that's him. That's Vincent. My uncle came to your signing himself. He has never in 20 years gone to handle anything himself. He sends men. He sent me once. His hand had closed around the back of a chair, the knuckles white. If he went himself, it's because he's confirmed the one thing I've spent my life keeping him from confirming. He knows you're alive. He knows you're Delaney's daughter, and he came to look at your face the way I did, except I came to spare you, and he came to measure you for a..." He stopped. "Pack a bag," he said. "Now, Adrian." He turned the ring at you. Adrian's voice was terrible and quiet. "Do you understand what that is? That's not surveillance. That's a man telling his prey that he sees it. That's a courtesy. He's giving you the night because he's old-fashioned and he enjoys it. By morning there will be a car." He was already moving, already at the window, already lifting the blind a careful inch to read the street below, and whatever he saw there made his whole body go still in a way she'd never seen the stillness of a man who has just felt the floor give. "There's already a car," he said softly. "Cora, there's already a car." The window exploded. Chapter 8. Blood on the Snow. Later, she would not be able to put the next 90 seconds in order. It came back to her, in the way her whole childhood came back in shards, in smell, in the wrong sequence. The glass. Adrian's body hitting hers, taking her down behind the heavy oak desk she'd chosen years ago, without knowing why, except that some part of her had always furnished her life for this moment. The sound, not the cinematic crack of movies, but a flat industrial hammering wood, splintering the lamp, dying the dark, coming down. His weight over her, his hand flat on the back of her head, pressing her into the floor, his voice in her ear, absolutely calm, in a way that was somehow the most frightening thing of all. "When I move, you move. Toward the second staircase. The one you always leave open. We're going to use it now. Adrian, you were right to keep 2 doors." A bullet took a chunk out of the desk above them and showered them with splinters. He didn't flinch. "I should have told you that. You've spent your whole life getting ready for tonight and you didn't even know it. Now move." They moved. She would remember the second staircase as the longest distance she had ever crossed the iron rail, cold under her hand. Adrian behind her and below her, his body, a wall between her spine and the room, the muzzle flashes throwing the whole place into a strobe of white and black. She would remember reaching the bottom door. Open, always open. The open door that the careful editor in him had scolded her about, and that the witness in her had refused to close, and bursting out into the alley. Into the snow. The snow. Always. The snow, and Adrian's hand closing around hers, and his voice run. And don't stop, the same words, the same cadence. 20 years folded into 1 second, and her 7-year-old self and her 31-year-old self running together through the white. And then the street. And the black SUV, she knew Matteo, the door already open, the engine already running, because Adrian Castellan never went anywhere he couldn't leave. And the last image, the one that would not leave her as she dove for the open door, she looked back and she saw Adrian turn in the middle of the snow-blanketed street. His charcoal coat thrown open, a gun in his hand. She hadn't known. He was carrying, planting himself between her and the men, pouring out of the building, one man against the dark snow falling through the streetlight. The muzzle of his weapon flashing his white shirt already blooming, red across the shoulder where a bullet had found him on the stairs, and he had not made a sound, had not let her know, had carried her down a staircase bleeding so that she wouldn't be afraid. "Get in," Matteo roared. She got in. Adrian got in. The SUV tore away through the snow, and Cora pressed both hands against the wound in his shoulder, and Adrian Castellan, bleeding all over the leather seat of his own car, looked at her with something in his face she had been refusing to name for weeks, and could refuse no longer. "You're hit," she said. "You're hit, you. I've been hit before," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd have stopped." He winced as the car took a corner. "And I needed you to run. His hand came up bloody, unsteady, and pushed a strand of glass-dusted hair off her face, the same gesture as the night in the studio, the candle cupped against the wind. 20 years, he said, I told myself I let that girl live because it was the one decent thing in me, the one thing that meant I wasn't all the way gone. His eyes were going glassy at the edges. She pressed harder on the wound and he let her. But that's not why. I figured it out tonight. Watching you keep that second door open your whole life without knowing why. He almost smiled. He didn't have the strength to finish it. I didn't save you because I was good, Cora. I saved you because some part of me knew I'd need you to come back. That a man like me would only ever get one chance to do something worth surviving for. And I was right. I'm bleeding in this car, and I've never in my life been so glad of anything. Don't you dare, she said. Don't you dare say goodbye in a moving car like a coward. And Adrian Castellan, for the first time in the entire time she'd known him, laughed a short, astonished, pained sound and said, No, you're right. That would be cheap. His eyes found hers, beneath us both. Then he passed out, and Cora kept her hands pressed to the wound, and Matteo drove them into the snow, and the city closed behind them like dark water. Chapter 9. The wound. He didn't die. She made certain of it. There was a doctor. There is always a doctor in his world. A quiet man in a quiet house who asked no questions and took Adrian into a back room while Cora stood in a hallway with her father's blood and Adrian's blood drying together on her hands and finally let herself shake. Matteo brought her coffee. She didn't drink and stood with her. And at some point in the grey hour before dawn, he said very simply, the thing that reorganized her understanding of everything. He's never let anyone see the wound. In 10 years. Not once. Matteo looked at the closed door. He let you press your hands on it. You should know what that means even if he can't say it. When Adrian woke hours later, pale against white sheets, his arm bound to his chest, the first thing he did was reach for her with his good hand, and the first thing he said was, He'll come for you again. Tonight didn't work, and Vincent has never in his life failed at a thing twice. He'll change the method. He'll make it look like an accident. A faulty furnace, maybe. Something dark and ironic crossed his face. He likes furnaces. Then we don't wait for him, Cora said. He looked at her. You're thinking about running, she said. New name, new city witness. Protection of your own design. You're thinking you'll hide me again, like you hid me at 7. She sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand in both of hers. I'm not 7, Adrian, and I'm done running. I ran for 20 years, and the whole time I was running, I was writing books about it, because some part of me was screaming the truth into the only place I was allowed to scream it. Her jaw set in the way that had told him that very first night across a candlelit table exactly who she was. He killed my father. He killed my mother. He has read every word I've published since I was 17, hunting me through my own books like I was a confession he was waiting to complete. I am not going to spend the rest of my life as a missing person. She leaned in. I'm going to write him an ending. Cora, you said it yourself, she said. I have the most dangerous mind you've ever met. So stop trying to hide it in a cabin in the snow. Pointed at him. Adrian Castellan looked at the woman he had carried out of a fire as a child, and out of a gunfight as a man, and he understood that he had spent 20 years thinking he was the one keeping her alive, when in fact she was the one thing that had kept him alive. A reason, a witness, a person who knew the worst of what he'd done and the single best, and had decided to stay anyway. All right, he said, but we do it my way and your way. You build the trap, I spring it. He pulled her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to her knuckles, the first time, the only ever first time, and it undid them both. And when it's done, Cora, when it's actually done, I'm going to take you somewhere with no second staircase. Because you won't need one. Not ever again. Promise me something else. She set her forehead against his. Anything. When it's over. Don't disappear back into your world like I'm a thing you saved and have to keep at a distance to keep clean. Her voice cracked the way it almost never did. 20 years I had a guardian I thought I invented. I don't want a guardian. I want the man. Bleeding and terrible and real. I want to know your wound. All of them. And Adrian Castellan, who had never in his life said the thing he said next, said it. You already do. You've been writing them for 4 books. He kissed her, then finally, carefully, a man cupping a candle against the wind, and the wind for once did not blow it out. Chapter 10. An ending for Vincent. The trap was built on the one thing Vincent Castellan could not resist being right. Cora understood him now, the way she understood all her doomed and frightened men, because she'd been understanding men like him her whole career. She'd just never had a name to put on the gift before. Vincent had spent 13 years certain that the witness lived, hunting that certainty through her novels. And the one thing a man like that cannot bear is to be told by the witness herself that he is wrong. So she made him an offer he'd believe was his idea. She let it be known through Adrian's people, through the careful cutouts, through a single planted interview in which the reclusive Cora Hale hinted she was working on a new book, a true one this time, the real story of a 1996 fire with a chapter that named the man who ordered it, that she was going to publish the truth, not fiction, names, and that there existed a second ledger, Thomas Delaney's real one, the one the government never got, the one that could end the Castellan organization and the old Don personally, and that she, the daughter, knew where her father had hidden it. It was bait wrapped in bait. There was no ledger. It had burned in 1996, but Vincent didn't know that, and a man who has spent 13 years afraid of a ghost cannot resist the chance to finally bury it himself, and to get the one piece of evidence that could destroy him while he's at it. He named the meeting place. He always named the place. It was how he kept control. An abandoned church on the south side, deconsecrated, scheduled for demolition, where the Castellans had settled their gravest business for 40 years. Snow on the broken pews, candles because Vincent was old-fashioned and liked the theater of it. He would come, he said, to take possession of the ledger and to look one last time into the face of the girl who should have burned. He came with 8 men. He did not know that Adrian had come with the only thing that mattered, which was the truth. Chapter 11. The church in the snow. The church was a ruin of cold light. Snow fell through a hole in the roof and gathered in a drift down the center aisle, and the candles Vincent's men had lit guttered in the draught, throwing the broken saints in the windows into trembling life. Cora walked up the aisle alone. That was the plan, the part Adrian had fought her on for an hour, and lost in her dark coat. Her father's daughter, the witness, carrying a slim leather case that everyone in that church believed held a ledger, and that actually held nothing at all. Vincent waited at the altar like a priest of something terrible. Up close, he was almost gentle-looking gray, and unhurried, the gold ring catching the candlelight. He smiled at her with what looked horribly like affection. "Cora Delaney," he said, savoring it. "Do you know I've read everything you've ever written? Every word. For 13 years I've watched you tell my story back to me in pieces, never quite naming me, circling and circling." He turned the ring once around his finger that tells she'd invented the lie he'd adopted 2 ghosts performing for each other. "I'll confess I grew almost fond. You write our world more truly than the men who live in it. Such a waste, your gift. Such a shame you couldn't simply have stayed dead." "You killed my father," Cora said. Her voice did not shake. She'd taught it not to a long time ago. "You killed my mother. You sent a 19-year-old boy to kill a 7-year-old girl in a paper crown." Something flickered in Vincent's face. "I sent my nephew to clean a house," he said. "He told me the house was clean. He told me there were no survivors." The smile sharpened into something with teeth. "He told me you burned. Adrian told me you burned, child. For 20 years." His eyes lifted past her to the shadows at the back of the church where Adrian had stepped into the candlelight. "Didn't you, Adrian? Tell me. How long have you known she was breathing?" And there it was, the real trap, the one inside Cora's trap, the one Vincent had walked into without knowing it existed. Because Cora had understood building this, that she could not simply expose Vincent. Vincent's men served Vincent. To win, she had to give them a reason to stop, and there is only one thing. An organization built on loyalty cannot forgive. And it is a boss who eats his own. "Tell them, Vincent," Cora said, not turning around, her eyes locked on the old man. "Tell your men the rest. Tell them what you did when you found out the witness lived. Tell them about the books." Her voice rose clear and terrible in the cold church. "Because you didn't just read my novels for 13 years, did you? You read my debut when I was 17, and it told you the witness was alive, and you knew the witness was a child you'd ordered killed." She finally turned slowly, taking in the 8 men, the snow, the candles, all of it. "So you sent men to find the author, and you couldn't find me. I'd had too many names by then, but you found the next best thing. You found the network of people who'd helped a little girl disappear in 1996, the foster system, the caseworkers, the one social worker who'd known her real name and kept it secret out of kindness." Vincent's face had gone very still. "You killed her," Cora said. "Margaret Reyes, the social worker who saved me. You killed her in 2003 to close a loop, because she was the only living person who could connect Cora Hale to Cora Delaney. And here's the thing, Vincent. She took one step toward him. Margaret Reyes was Mateo's mother. The silence in the church was total. In the shadows, Mateo, Adrian's driver, Adrian's most trusted man, the man who'd brought Cora coffee in a grey hallway and told her what a wound meant, stepped forward into the candlelight with a face like the breaking of the world. I spent 6 months building it, Cora said quietly to the room now, to all of them. Following the thread the way I follow every thread. My gift, Vincent. The one you admired. I followed it all the way back to a woman named Margaret Reyes, who died in a fire in 2003. To another fire. Vincent, you really do love them. And whose son grew up and went to work for the Castellans, never knowing his mother was murdered by the man he drove to dinner every night. I didn't come here for a ledger. There is no ledger. It burned with my father. She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was her father's daughter's smile. I came here to read you the last chapter, and to make sure the right people were in the room when I did. Vincent's 8 men were no longer looking at Cora. They were looking at Mateo, who had drawn his weapon, and whose hand was not shaking, and who said in a voice scraped raw, "Say it isn't true. Look me in the face and say you didn't kill my mother. Go on, Vincent. Turn your ring at me." Vincent Castellan looked at the men he had commanded for 40 years and saw in their faces the one thing he had spent his whole life, ensuring he would never see the moment the fear stopped being about him and started being about what he'd done. He had built an empire on the principle that loyalty flowed up. He had never once imagined it could be cut. "You'd take the word of a novelist," he began. "He'll take the word of his mother's killer," Adrian said, stepping fully into the light at last when his mother's killer can't deny it. He moved up the aisle to stand beside Cora, his arm still bound to his chest, a gun in his good hand, and he was no longer the contained, careful man of the book signing. He was something older and colder and finally fully free. "It's over, Vincent. Not because of the ledger, not because of me. Because he didn't look at Cora. He didn't have to spend 6 months pointing the most dangerous mind I've ever met directly at you. You hunted her through her books for 13 years, and the whole time she was the one writing your ending. It did not end with a speech." Vincent Castellan had not survived 40 years by accepting endings, and so he reached the way men like him always reach for the gun beneath his coat. And the church came apart into noise and snow and candlelight, the old saints in the windows trembling in the muzzle flashes, and Cora was on the cold stone floor, with Adrian's body over hers. Once again, the second time, the snow falling through the broken roof onto both of them, and she thought, with the strange clarity that came to her in shattered moments, this is the image. This is the one they'll remember. And then it was over as fast as it had begun. When the noise stopped, Vincent Castellan was on his back at the foot of his own altar, his gold ring still on his finger, the snow falling on his open eyes, and the man who had killed him was Mateo, who stood over the body of his mother's murderer, with tears freezing on his face, and who let his gun fall to the stone floor with a sound that echoed through the ruined church like a bell. Adrian rose slowly, his bound arm screaming, and helped Cora to her feet, and she stood in the falling snow in the broken church and looked at the body of the man who had ended her family and waited to feel something enormous. What she felt instead was quiet. The closet under the stairs in the back of her mind was empty now. The 7-year-old in the paper crown had finally been able to stand up and walk out. And the smoke smell that had followed her for 20 years through every sleepless night, every blinded window, every book was just snow now. Just clean, cold, falling snow. "It's done," Adrian said. He didn't say it to comfort her. He said it because it was true and because he had learned from her that she preferred the true thing to the comforting one. "It's done," she agreed. She looked at him in the candlelight, bleeding again. Probably the man was always bleeding, and she understood that she had written this moment in pieces across 4 books and 17 years. The guardian and the witness in the snow. Never, knowing she was writing a memory and a prophecy at the same time. "Take me somewhere with no second staircase," she said. And Adrian Castellan smiled, the real one finally, the one he'd been building since the night across the candlelit table, and he took her hand, and they walked together down the snow-drifted aisle and out of the ruined church into the white morning, leaving the candles to gutter out behind them. Chapter 12. Ink and Ash. She published one more book. It was called Ink and Ash, and her editor wept reading it. And the critics, the same ones who had called her cheap entertainment airport fiction, a writer of grocery list murders, fell silent, and then fell over themselves because it was the truest thing she had ever written, a novel about her, witness and a guardian and a fire, and they all assumed she'd finally brilliantly invented something. It was the only book of her career that wasn't true. She made every word of it up. She'd earned the right. She dedicated it to 3 people. To Thomas, who kept the photograph, to Margaret, who kept the secret, and then a third line. No name that no critic ever decoded and that exactly one reader on Earth understood. And to the stranger in the snow who told a little girl to run, and then spent the rest of his life running with her. They lived after in a house on a cold northern coast where the storms came in off the water, and the snow fell clean. And the only fires were the ones Adrian built in the great stone hearth, deliberately watching her face in the light to make sure the smell never frightened her every single time for the rest of their lives. The house had one staircase. She never once felt the need to leave a door open. And on winter nights when the storm came hard against the windows and the candles leaned in the draught, Cora Castellan would write at a desk by the fire, while the most dangerous man in the city read over her shoulder, arguing with her about her own characters as though they were people he was personally responsible for. And somewhere far down inside her, in a room that used to be a bricked-over closet and was now just an ordinary sunlit place, a little girl in a paper crown sat with her father, finally safely, and watched the snow fall on a city that could no longer touch them. She had spent her whole life writing about the worst night of it. She got to spend the rest of it writing the after, the end. And that's where we leave Cora and Adrian, one staircase, one fire, that finally warms instead of burns, and a love story written in ink and ash. If this story kept you holding your breath, do me one small favor. Tap that like button. It's the quiet signal that tells me you want more dangerous, slow-burn love stories exactly like this one. Share this with the one person you know who secretly falls for the man who would burn the whole world down for one woman. And come down to the comments. I read every single one. Tell me who broke your heart more tonight, Adrian or Vincent. Did you see the Mateo twist coming before the church? Or did it get you the way it got me? Now here's the real question, the one I need your help with. Who do you want next? A mafia boss, and the nurse who saved his life on the operating table and now can't get the danger out of her blood. A mafia boss, and the ballerina dancing center stage in his most dangerous club. A mafia boss, and the runaway bride who climbed into the wrong black SUV on the worst and best night of her life. Drop your dream pairing down below. Give me the couple, give me the setting, give me the secret. If I turn your idea into the next story, I'll shout you out by name when it drops. And if you're new here, subscribe and ring that bell so the next obsession finds you the moment the candles are lit. The snow's already falling on the next one. I'll see you there.